Today, we are going to cover essence of Vedanta, right? So the Vedanta is a ocean of wisdom. So we are going to talk about essence of Vedanta. We are going to talk about who am I. Again, it is coming from the Vedanta, that is Jnana Yoga, wherein we are going to make an inquiry, who am I? Then we will move to the spirituality and we will talk about the stages of spirituality, application of spirituality, management in our regular life. Then we are going to have a demo on coaching with spiritual intelligence. So I'm aware that many of you are already coaches. At the same time, few of you are not coaches. So we will introduce coaching briefly to you, and then we will go for a demo, around 20 minutes demo on a coaching with spiritual intelligence. And then at the end, we are going to have a question answer session. So this knowledge sharing presentation with the videos will go on till 7:30. Around 7:30, we are going to start with the demo. The demo will last till 7:50 or few minutes more than 7:50. And then at the end, there will be a question and answer session. Since we are packing too much wisdom, uh, too much activities today, we will extend this particular workshop for 15 minutes. So the only people who have any questions can wait beyond 8 p.m. Otherwise, the workshop will be officially concluded by 8 p.m. Extra 15 minutes are only there if you have any questions and you want to stay back. So this agenda I have already explained you, and now we will start with the prayer. It's a 2-minute prayer, and then we will start the workshop.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
So now I'm going to brief a little on Veda, Upanishads, and Advait Vedanta. So now personally, I'm not an expert of either Vedas or Upanishad or Vedanta. Not only that, I don't know Sanskrit. I have understood this from the practical application in my life and reading books and the videos of Vedanta Society, and specifically Swami Sarva Priyananda, and there are many more Swamis of the Vedanta Society. So I have learned from that for last 4 years. So my study of Vedas and Upanishad is only 4 years old. So the Rishis and knowledgeable people spend their entire life in understanding Vedanta, Upanishad. And I also understand that few of you may have more knowledge on Vedanta, Upanishad, or even Advait Vedanta. So with due respect to everyone who is on a journey of wisdom through Vedas and Upanishad, let me humbly start this particular session of Advait Vedanta which has emerged from the Vedas and Upanishads. So we will first talk about the Vedas. So the word Veda has been derived from the root word Vid. Vid means wisdom. Veda describes spiritual knowledge encompassing all aspects of life of a humankind. The Hindu epic Mahabharata credits the creation of Veda to Brahma, the creator of the universe, while modern Vedic scholars give its credit to many ancient sages. Ved Vyasa systemized, edited, and divided the Vedas into four: Rig Ved, Yajur Ved, Sam Ved, and Atharva Ved. There are total 108 Upanishads under these four Vedas, out of which 10 have been stated here, because there is a commentary available from Jagadguru Sri Adi Shankaracharya ji on these 10 Upanishads. So you can consider that these 10 are prime Upanishad, important, major Upanishad. So we are stating those 10 into this particular slide. The last Upanishad, what you are seeing, the Mandukya Upanishad is the smallest of the Upanishad. It has only 12 mantras or 12 shlokas, only 12, considering more hundreds of the shlokas in other Upanishads. But it is like a very hot mirchi. So very small, but very intense in wisdom. So today, whatever we are going to cover in Who Am I is directly coming from this single Upanishad called as Mandukya Upanishad. So when you talk about the Rig Veda is the oldest of the four Vedas. And the Rig Veda primarily talks about meditation and many mantras. If you talk about Yajur Veda, it is devoted to the worship of the gods. Yajur means worship. Samaveda is about music, chanting. So Samveda focuses on Bhakti Yoga. And Atharva Veda focuses on philosophy of who am I, as well as Ayurveda and your the how a human body works. So it covers body, it covers mind, it covers philosophy of who am I. So this is what I can very in short I can explain you on the Vedas, four Vedas. And what exactly is Upanishad? Upanishad is whatever is the sar of Vedas, the conclusion part, the end part of the Vedas is called as Upanishad. So the Vedas can be divided into the two parts, or they are divided into the two parts. One is called as Karma Kand, action, rituals, and another is related to the Gyan, right? So what Upanishads are part of the Gyan part, knowledge part of the Vedas. So the Upanishads do not contain any rituals or the action parts. Upanishad is, I can say, one of the most or the highest philosophical text humankind has created. So they are not belonging to some Hindu religion or any other religion. They are for the humankind. So there is no great wisdom anywhere which a human has experienced apart from the Upanishad. And Upanishad dates back to 1500 BCE, that is 3500 years back. So it is one of the oldest of text wisdom written by humans. And Upanishad essentially talks about the knowledge of human being, what human being is, what human being should do, right? So everything, the life wisdom is what Upanishads are, right? So, and today we are going to talk about the Vedan, which is Anta of Vedas, Veda Anta, that is end of Vedas, right? From the Upanishad, There is a Upanishad called as Mandukya. In that particular Mandukya, there is a detailed self-inquiry. There is a detailed inquiry on who am I, is what we are going to cover. Why we are going to cover it? Because unless we understand who we are, where is the question of we having goals, purpose of life, right? So this is a very basic, fundamental inquiry. Unfortunately, we don't do that particular fundamental inquiry in our lifetime. Today, we are going to indulge into that fundamental inquiry briefly. So, Vedanta, if someone has to learn from stages. Uh, the first stage will be the very basic inquiry. But what I'm doing, considering the August audience I'm having, and I understand that many of you are already aware something about Vedas, Upanishad, Vedanta, and spirituality, and that is the reason why you are attending this particular workshop. So I'm taking liberty to start with the highest concept and not start with a very small concept. I'm directly starting from the Vedant. What is Vedant? And then step by step, we will go into the basic philosophical aspects of Vedant. So it's a small video from Swami Satyamayananda.
Vedanta is the science of the soul. It's a science of consciousness. It is a science of yourself. Secondarily, they are the set of books of philosophy, which is one of the most ancient philosophies in the world, derived from the Vedas. Lord says in the Bhagavad Gita that I am the originator of the Vedanta, Vedanta Krit. This science of the soul is what is really required today because of the rise of materialism and skepticism that is hampering human development. This science of consciousness is what even science is trying to discover, and which was discovered by the ancient sages in India. It's a remarkable fact in our lives. It is what we are. We are by nature Vedantists. This search for consciousness is a search of unity. Unity internal, unity external. And at the highest levels of Vedanta, both these levels of consciousness, the individual and the universal, merge. And we find this massive level of absolute consciousness pervading everything and everyone. This is the Brahman of the Vedanta, the absolute existence, consciousness, bliss. This absolute reality is in you, in me, in everything that you see, hear, think, touch, talk of. It is the divinization of life. Life becomes divine. Life becomes worth living. Life becomes broad. It preaches the highest levels of morality. It preaches the highest levels of renunciation. This consciousness is supreme. And the final words of the Vedanta are, thou art that, tat tvam asi. How to practicalize it? There are two ways. Vedanta will say, lift your life to the ideal. How do you do that? By hearing about it, thinking about it, and meditating upon it. The Shravana and Manana and Nididhyasana. Another way of actualizing this divinity, this consciousness within is to plunge down deep within yourself, go down to the very core of your being. You will find yourself reaching the very core of existence, the very core of knowledge, of consciousness, and the very core of bliss. The root of the universe is the same as the root of your own being. This superconscious realm has to be opened. It is part of your nature. We have somehow closed ourselves to it. We need to go and open it. And only you can do that. Do it.
So the Vedanta essentially gives us a teaching that we need to divinize our relationship with the human beings. Why? Because we are all part of the divine. We are all part of the pervading pure consciousness. But what we do, we divinize the gods, we focus on other aspects, we focus on something else than humanity, and then humanity takes backseat. So this is one of the greatest teaching of Vedantas, that divinize our relationship with human beings. So now I'm going to give you a small story which may bring some clarity to who we are and what pure consciousness or what oneness we are talking in Vedanta. Of course, this story is from Vedanta. I am the medium to communicate this story to you. In the Arabian Ocean, big ocean, there was a small wave. Of course, there were many waves. This particular small wave, the story is of this particular small, cute wave. This particular small wave is traveling. It is traveling towards the shore of Goa. When it is traveling, it is seeing itself. It is happy, enjoying its life. But that enjoyment does not last much. After some time, the wave sees larger, bigger wave beside. That wave thinks that, oh my God, that is very big wave. I am small, inferiority complex. After some time, that cute wave sees another small wave, much smaller than herself. Cute wave says, oh, very small wave. I am big, superiority complex. So all these things are happening in the mind of the cute wave. Alongside, a friend wave joins the journey alongside the cute wave, and they start chit-chatting. Then, of course, there is a discussion on, okay, I like these waves, I don't like these waves. Whom I like are my friend wave, whom I don't like are my foe waves, enemy waves. So they were discussing, they were gossiping. After some time, the cute wave sees that is okay, there is a shore, there is a land. The Goa is approaching, and that cute wave asks to the friend wave, what is that? Friend says, that is the doom. That is our end. That is how we are going to end on the shore. Oh my God, now all this particular energy, all this enthusiasm, all this happiness of the cute wave goes down, because now the cute wave is seeing its own end. Fortunately, alongside comes Vedantic wave. Vedantic wave asks to the cute wave, what is the problem? What is happening? Cute wave says, I'm going to die and this is the shore. I was so happy. I was enjoying my life. But now I'm seeing that in few minutes, I'm going to die. Then Vedantic wave asks to the cute wave, who are you? I'm wave. Who are these particular Means whatever you are seeing the surrounding this ocean, what is that? That is ocean. They are the other waves. I am me, right? I am different. They are different. Then Vedantic wave discusses further, makes an inquiry. Of course, if it's a coach is going to ask many intriguing questions to the cute wave. For the paucity of the time, I am only giving you the crux. And during the questioning, the Vedantic wave realizes to the cute wave that is in you are made of the water. You are a cute wave, you are a separate wave, is what you are thinking, but you are also made of the water. Friend wave is also made of the water. Other waves are also made of the water. So what is your essence? Okay, then cute wave understands, okay, my essence is water. Now, Vedantic wave tells, since your essence is water, on the shore, your form is going to diminish, but the water is going to remain. And the water doesn't have a start or end. The water is forever. So again the cute wave says, good for water. Good that water is not dying, but I am going to die. Then again Vedantic wave makes inquiry, discusses, and realizes that you are water. It is not that water and you are separate. You are water means when you will lose your form on the shore, you are going to immerse yourself in the water and you are going to recreate yourself after some time. So you are not going to end because you are water and all these waves, this entire ocean is one. So this simple small story tells us that is the same thing is applicable to the human beings. We are all part of the divine. We are all part of the pure consciousness, like Swamiji was telling. But these bodies, these belief systems, right? We are separating ourselves from the human beings. And we have all these problems within ourselves. So this particular, so the Vedantic teaching, and which is a fact, and which Swami Vivekananda ji has tried to spread across the world. That is, we are all one. Only our egos, beliefs, fears, perceptions, non-purposeful goals separate us from each other. So the Vedantic teaching is not about religion. It is not about Hindu religion or some other religion. Vedantic teaching is about religion of humanity. Vedantic teaching is about harmony. And this is not a sentence, what you are saying from some Hindu scholar. It is a Persian, Islamic scholar, Rumi. And he is making this statement that when I'm searching for God, I'm finding myself. And when I'm searching for myself, I'm finding God. So if this will be the ideology, the philosophy, the thought process, what better, what best, what divine is going to happen to the world? And Vedanta philosophy is the future, whether it is now, whether it is after 10 years, whether it is after 100 years, whether it is after 1,000 years, I don't know. But this is the future of human race, Vedanta ideology. So with this, we will go for a inquiry of who am I, and the inquiry of who am I is being done here to Jnana Yoga. So the Vedas and Upanishad teaches us 4 divine royal paths: Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So we are here talking about Jnana Yoga. So this inquiry is through the knowledge. This inquiry is through the thinking process. So this I'm going to explain you with some very small concepts, right? I will try to make you as simple as possible. So the first concept is seer and seen. Now I will take my example. Right now I'm seeing at the computer screen, and I hope that you are also seeing your computer screen. So since this example, I am taking my own case. So I will explain you through my case. So now I am a seer. Seer is who is seeing the things, who is experiencing. I am experiencing this computer screen, which is in front of me. But am I experiencing only the computer screen, my eyes, right? So when I say I means right now my eyes are seeing the computer screen. So my eyes are one seer, but am I seeing only computer screen? No, I'm seeing the computer screen. I'm seeing the speaker. I'm seeing the water bottle. I'm seeing a notebook. I'm seeing variety of the other things which are in my surrounding. So what I am seeing are many things, but I am one. My eyes are one. So in this particular first stage, my eyes are the seer and the things around me are being seen by my eyes. Simple concept. Now, who is seeing my eyes? My mind is seeing my eyes, right? It is the mind. So the eyes are giving signal to my mind, right? So my mind is watching my eyes and my eyes are seeing through the mind, right? So my brain, my mind is the seer and my eyes are the seen. Eyes are changing, right? I will have specs, I will have issues with the eyes, right? So eyes are changing, but my mind seeing the eyes is remaining the same. So now in the level two, who is the seer? Seer is my mind. Who is the seen? My eyes are seen by my mind. Now we will go to the level three. Who is seeing the mind? Now people will say that, okay, it is brain. So the brain is a part of the body. Mind is your thinking process. So now how you are understanding that you are having mind and you are thinking means the seer of the mind is something different and the seer of mind is seeing the mind. Of course, in some cases, mind will introspect. In some cases, mind will also think that is okay, what is happening within myself. But are you doing the introspection for 24 by 7? No, right? So you are also understanding that my mind is now not stable. My mind is sad, right? My uh, mind is chanchal, right? So you are also observing. So who are you who is observing the mind? So that ultimate seer is the consciousness within you who is seeing the mind. And we are going to elaborate on this particular concept. I'm not going to stop here, but I'm going to just, I have introduced you the concept of the seer and seen. So the many times we think that my body is me. Okay, after some time, we will think that my mind is me. But who is seeing your mind? That consciousness is who you really are. So now with this, I will again go for a very small story. The story, this particular story is of an emperor, Janak. The emperor Janak, at the end of his lifetime, got illumined. He understood who he was. But this particular story is from the time period when he was not illumined. He was yet to be enlightened, but a great king, powerful king. One day, when he was on bed, he heard, King Janak, wake up, wake up. And he saw the guard is running towards his bed. And the guard says, that is king, enemy has attacked us. And now you please see what we have to do. Otherwise, we will be ruined. So that, of course, the guard is in a very, say, anxious state. So the king, of course, walks up. Meantime, the information is already gone to his journals and all that. And they also become ready. They don't have any time to strategize because the enemy has already attacked, unfortunately. So they, whatever the small time they have, they discuss as quickly and they start fighting. But unfortunately, the king succumbs to a defeat. The enemy king defeats the great King Janak. And the guards of the enemy king brings King Janak with all these particular chains and says that, okay, so now he is the King Janak. Now that enemy king, although not very spiritual, says that you are a royal blood. I would have killed you. But since you are a royal blood, I will not kill you. But of course, I'm going to exile you. And you are exiled from this particular kingdom. From now on, this is my kingdom. And he exiles King Janak. So the King Janak don't have any other option. Means at that time there were no cars and all that. So he keeps walking out of his kingdom. He tries to ask water and the food, but the people in his kingdom are not giving him because they are fearful of this particular new king, because the King Janak and they are enemies. So now he is hungry, right? So he walks for a few days, and then finally he sees one queue where the people are donating food. In India, it is called as khichdi, right? So a mix of rice and lentils, and there is a big queue. So the King Janak don't have any other option. Nobody knows him in this particular persona. So he stands in a queue, and when he reaches to that particular person who is offering the food, unfortunately, the food gets finished. So now King Janak is very hungry and is very devastated stage, right? There's very bad stage. So now that person also understands. That person says that, hey, are you going to wait for some time? The food is going to come after maybe hour or two, or I have only the starch left at the bottom of the barrel. Do you want that starch? King means the prior king says that yes, no problem. Give me whatever is that, and with a trembling hand he gives the bowl and he pours some little starch in the bowl. With the trembling hand, as the king wants to eat or drink that particular starch, a kite, chill, a kite swoops down and touches the bowl to take the bowl from the king's hand, and the bowl goes to the dust. It tumbles and all the stars get mixed in a sand. Oh my God, king says, what is this horrendous thing I am suffering? I am not even getting a iota of food, right? And he falls down on the earth, crying in a devastated stage, horrendous stage. And again he hears, cooking, what has happened? What has happened? And he finds himself on his bed, and the guard is asking, that is why you are shouting loudly and crying. Now this king is not a normal being. At the end of his life, he got enlightened. So he is a philosopher. He is a Gyani. Now he starts thinking, what is this? Is this true? Or was that true? क्या ये सच या वो सच? वो is that which he experienced in the dream, and ye is this truth which now he is seeing in his palace. So now he gets devastated. Why? Because his emotions are intense. His heart is pounding. He is crying. He is feeling sweat. So it is so true. So then he continuously starts asking, kya wo sach, kya ye sach? So when I say it Hindi, understand that I'm talking that, was that true or is this true? Right? So this I'm saying in Hindi, kya wo sach, ya ye sach? Now, queen comes. Queen asks him, okay, king, what has happened? I understand that there is a nightmare. Don't worry. But the king, kya wo sach ya ye sach? Oh my God. Now the information spreads to the kingdom. That is, there is some issue with the king. Most probably he has gone crazy and he is asking the same question time and again. Fortunately, his teacher, Ashtavakra sage, is going from near to his kingdom. He gets the information that some problem is there and he comes to the palace. Now the king is sitting, all his gentries and journals and ministers, everyone is here, but no work is being done. He is only asking, kya was such? Kya yes such? So Ashtavakra was a jnani. He understood. He understood what has happened, and he asked king, hey King Janak, what happened? King says, kya was such? Yeah, yes such. Then Ashtavakra say, that is when in your dream you got defeated, you got humiliated. Was that real? King says, yes, it was real. I felt that I'm experiencing that. Okay, fine. Now I am discussing with you and all this palace and this poem, right? Are you seeing, are you experiencing that? Is this real? King says, yes, this is also real. I'm seeing it. I'm experiencing it. Then Ashtavakra says, hey king, na wo sach, na ye sach. Whatever you have seen in your dream is not the truth. And whatever you are seeing now is also not the truth. King goes again mad. King says, oh my God, then nothing is truth. What we are doing then? Is nothing the truth? Then sage Ashtavakra says, hey king, na wo sach na ye sach, par tum hi sach. Neither that was true, nor this is true, but you are the truth. But who you are is our inquiry. So, whether it is a dream or whether it is the sansar, whether it is the Vishwa, what we are seeing, neither is the truth. But the ultimate reality is you who is witnessing everything. So this has been explained in the Vedanta with the 4 consciousness stages. And they are called as waker, dreamer, sleeper, and turiya. So the waker is this particular awareness state. Right now we are into this masterclass workshop. Hopefully you are awake. We have this particular interaction. You are listening intently, in bracket, hopefully. So this is the waking state. So we think that, so the waking state is what? Basically, we have the 5 senses, and these 5 senses are giving you the information, and because of that, you are realizing, you are seeing from your eyes, you are hearing from your ears, right? You are sensing, you are feeling. So all these 5 senses, right, are the instrument of you in your waking state. Now the same you goes to the sleep and you see the dream. So the waking state is represented by physical body. The first state, waking state, is represented by your physical body called as sharir. In English, it is called as gross body, but the gross is a wrong word. So I will use the word physical body. So because you have this physical body, the instrument, you are in a waking state, you are experiencing the Vishwa, you are experiencing the world. So waking state. You go to the dream. Now you do not recognize the body. In the dream, whatever you are feeling, you are not using your senses, you are only using your mind. So senses are related to the body. Because in a dream, your body is not active, right? It is called as Sushma Sharira, subtle body. So your subtle body, with the help of mind, with the help of the memories, imagination, creativity, is dreaming. So in a dreaming, you are not utilizing the instruments of your body, but you are using the instrument of your mind, right? So this is another state, what we all experience, consciousness state, right? In a dream. So Just excuse me for 1 minute. I'm just seeing some sound. Right. Okay. So in a dream state, in that particular state, you are experiencing not the world, but the world in your mind. And is that particular world real? In the dream state, it is real to you. In a waking state, it is not real to you, like the story of the King Janak. But in a dream state, it is real to you. You are seeing other people, you are sensing, you are feeling, right? If you are eating laddu, you are experiencing that particular taste in your dream. Not your tongue, not your body, but your mind is experiencing all your senses in the dream. So this is the, so this you are experiencing. Now, who is the dreamer? Right. So there is a consciousness who is watching that you are dreaming. Right. So there is a consciousness at the background, right, in the dream stage. Now, there will be few minutes or some time during the dream or the during your total sleep time where you will go in deep sleep. In the deep sleep, neither body nor mind is active or aware. But are you alive? Are you there in the deep sleep? Of course, you are there because you are going to wake up in the morning. So now, when your body is not aware, when your mind is not aware, who are you? So still you are the consciousness, right? Although you are not feeling body, although you are not feeling your mind in the deep sleep, still you are who you are. So the your physical body, which is the instrument in your waking state, is not you. Your mind, which helps you in a dreaming state, is also not you, because your mind is also going to stop working during your sleep stage, deep sleep stage. And when the mind and body are also stopping working in your deep stage and you are still there, right? Then who you are? So you are the fourth. So the waker is the first state, dreamer is the second state, sleeper is the third state, and you are the fourth. You are the Chaturtham. So in Sanskrit, Gaudapadacharya has written this particular word. This is not into the original Upanishads, but he has written in his Karika called as Turiya. You are the Turiya. Turiya is nothing but the fourth. So you are not the waker. You are not the dreamer. You are also not the sleeper. You are the fourth person. And that the fourth person is the consciousness, what we are talking in the Vedanta. And that consciousness is there in each and every one of us. We are all part of that particular pure consciousness. Our bodies and minds separates us from each other is the ideology, is the philosophy of Vedanta. So this can be also explained through the Panchakoshas, right? So the what is Panchakosha? Panchakosha is a system of guhas. Panchakosha is a network wherein there are sheets over your Atman. So don't go for this particular figure literally. Literally, your pure consciousness is not encompassed by the five sheets. No one can encompass your Atman or the your pure consciousness. This is just a representation. So just look it at is a simple representation. That's it. So the first sheet is your body, sharir, physical body. Now, am I the physical body? Of course not. Because I know that there is a prana shakti, there is an energy because of which my body is functioning. Right? I'm taking the breath, right? And this breath, this particular energy is what enables my body to function. So the first sheath is body, and then the next sheath is the energy. Now, am I in a position to understand that I am breathing? Am I in a position to control my breathing? Of course, yes. So mind. So who is controlling the breath and the energy? Your mind is controlling that. So the third layer, third sheet is called as mind. But what is mind? Mind is just accumulating information with the five senses. There is an intellect behind the mind who makes the decision, who segregates what is good, what is bad, what I need, what I don't want. So that segregation, that intelligence, that decision making power is discernment. So that is the fourth layer of intelligence. And then the fifth cover, what our pure consciousness has is bliss, Anand. Everyone is after happiness, everyone is after Anand. So, what is this koshas? This koshas doesn't mean we have to uncover all these particular sheets and go inside, go inside, go inside. No, means the real representation of this figure is there is a pure consciousness, and pure consciousness is looking at all these particular sheets, 4 sheets, 5 sheets, right? So this is the real representation, but this is just for the simplification, right? What we do, we identify with the body. What we do, we identify with our energy. What we do, we identify with our mind, with our intellect, and with our bliss state, with the desire to become happy. These are all sheets. Because you are identifying with this particular sheets in this particular sequence, the body is the rawest sequence and the bliss is the highest possible, say, feeling or the emotion, right? All these sheets are not real sheets. They are the sheets which are covering your pure consciousness. So once you uncover these sheets through Jnana Yoga, through understanding who you really are, you understand that you are a part of the pure consciousness. So this is Panchakosha, with which also you understand, right? So there are 3 bodies, right? One is the physical body, right? Sharir. One is a Sukshma Sharir, which is the subtle body. And the third is the Karana Sharir, that is causal body. So these are the 3 bodies we are talking, but we either identify with our physical body or at the most with our subtle body. But once we uncover this, we go to the pure consciousness. And how to go to this particular pure consciousness? Only through Jnana. Jnana is a shortcut, right? So you can reach this state with any of the yogas. Through Bhakti Yogas also, Bhakti Yoga, you can reach the state. Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is a shortcut, right? So there are 2 ways to reach who you are. One is called as a way of an ant, step by step, which most probable case is first we go for Karma Yoga. We do all the work. Then we go for Raja Yoga. Then we go for the yoga, meditation and all that. And then at the end, we go for a Jnana Yoga. So this is a general sequence of the ant way. But there is a bird way. You can fly. And that the bird way is you can directly go to the Jnana Yoga. So this explanation, what I did was an explanation from the view of Jnana Yoga. So let us see one small video on who am I.
You are that one immortal light. I am that same one immortal light. So it is the same in all of us, that one consciousness. Bodies are different. Minds are different. Personal histories are different. The little persons are different. They have their own, the waves are all different. They have their own histories. But the water is common to all of them. There is one consciousness common to all of us. That one unchanging consciousness. And that consciousness is the essence of who we are. We think we are bodies with consciousness. Vedanta wants us to understand that we are consciousness with bodies. We think we are human beings in search of a spiritual experience. The truth is, Vedanta wants us to understand we are spiritual beings having a human experience. It is one consciousness, and that consciousness is the essence of who we are. And remember, what did we say? That which is unchanging, that which is same everywhere, one everywhere, and that which is the essence is the truth. That consciousness is the reality, body and mind is the appearance. You are in reality an unchanging, immortal, pure consciousness. The person is an appearance. The person whom we take to be real. We think that our reality is this person I am. This is an appearance. Appearance of what? Of that one unchanging, essential consciousness. The very word person. I was amazed to discover how the English word person came. It has its roots in ancient Greece. When in theatrical performances, they had open air amphitheaters, and in theatrical performances, the actors would come out. They had no microphone or anything like that. So they would come out and shout out their lines, what they had to say, and each actor was performing as a character, and that character they would depict with a big mask. They would hold the mask in front of them and then say their lines. And those masks were apparently called personae. Personae. And that's what the word personality means, a mask. I am this person, it's a mask. You're saying I am this mask. Who wears the mask?
Who wears the mask? So now we will go to understand the stages of spiritual development. And I have studied for last few years variety of the religions and the thought processes which do have a separate but similar ideology on the stages of spiritual development. And this is a chart which compares variety of the thought processes, right? And there is a Sufism, there is a Tozhan, there is a Jain, there is of course our own Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. But what I'm going to focus today is on stages of spiritual development from the perspective of Advaita Vedanta, non-dual, that is one pure unchanging consciousness, right? So from this particular ideology, we are going to see these particular stages. Now, if you see the first two stages, third stage is seeking, honest self-investigation, and the fourth stage is Tattvapati and Asam Shakti and Padartha Bhavana, Turiya, it is difficult, right? So unless you really read it, I'm not talking about the Sanskrit words. Of course, you can understand that in any language. It is not related to the language, but it is related to the entire that flow. So I thought that I can explain you with the help of a metaphor, right? And the metaphor what I'm going to use is a sunrise, a very simple metaphor. So I can say that enlightenment is like a sunrise. A spiritual development is like a sunrise. The sun rises, but sun doesn't rise immediately. It's a process, right? Step by step, the sun rises. And that metaphor I'm going to use and try to explain you. And this I have not seen anywhere in whatever videos or whatever books I have referred. This particular example was not given, but I thought that let me take a try of trying to explain with this particular example. So this is the first stage. The first stage is ignorance, darkness. It is a pitch dark in the night, and you even cannot imagine that there is a possibility of the light. This, for example, you don't know the world, and when you are awake, you are only seeing this particular night. Can you imagine that there is a possibility of the light? So this is the ground zero. This is not the first stage. This is called as ground zero stage on spiritual development. Pure darkness, absolute ignorance. From this particular stage, later on, what happens? The sky assumes a gray color. The dawn. Slowly, it becomes gray color. Slowly. So this is called as stage number 1, which is in Sanskrit, it is called as Subhecha. What is Subhecha? Desire to do something good. Simple. From total ignorance, now you have a desire to do something good. Now you are seeker. So the person who is on a spiritual journey is called as a seeker. So the first stage of you realizing that you want to do something good, is associated with the first stage called as seeker. So this is the first stage of spiritual development. Very simple. And I'm going to explain this in three ways. This is only the first way. Right? But the first way I'm going to take maximum time. Second stage. Now, the sky is pinkish, but there is a gray color as well. So it's a mix of pink and gray. Now you are contemplating, you are thinking. This stage is called as vicharna, investigation. Now you are investigating what is the truth, how I can do good. One is only the desire, one is only the concept. Now you are talking about the ways of doing good, which is the right way. You start as a seeker, you start investigation, right? Now the sky is opening up, sky is getting pinkish. This is called the second stage of spiritual development, called as investigation or vicharna. Now you will see the sun rising from the east. Now you see more pink color. Now you see freshness. Now you see that yes, there is a powerful energy. This is called as Tanu Manasi. Literal meaning in English, I search, it is called as thinning of your mind. But the thinning of the mind or these are all metaphors, because all these Vedanta and the Rishis have written with the stories and the metaphors. So you should not take everything literally. So basically it's a focus. Now you are focusing on the sun. You are seeing, now you are focusing. So this is the third stage. In third stage, what is happening? You are focusing your mind on one. So all these desires, imagination, and all kind of this varied thoughts are getting diminished, and now you are focusing on one. You are focusing on who you are. You are focusing on your spiritual objective. So this stage is called as Tanu Manasi, which is concentrating or focusing on one. So this is the stage called as, say, stage number 3. Now you are going to see a golden yellow sky. Now you are going to see the full sun, but not very bright, but a golden yellow sky. This is called as Sattva Guna. Golden, yellow, pleasant, but clear. So this is called as a stage called as Sattvapati, fourth stage. Sattvapati. What is Sattvapati? Attainment of high purity. Now you are attaining purity, purity of thoughts, purity of mind, purity of heart, Sattvapati. Fourth stage. Then in the fifth stage, now you are going to see a full bright sun. Now the consciousness of externality melts down to the consciousness of universality. So now you are seeing the universe as it is. Not from your own perception, but as it is. This is called as Asama Shakti. So, what this stage corresponds to? This stage corresponds to detachment from externality, detachment from Maya, detachment from the Vishwa. So, this is called as, so now you are very clear. You are 101% clear, right? So, you are in the stage of Samashakti. You are detaching yourself from the Maya, is called as the fifth stage. Now comes the sixth stage, second last stage, called as Padartha Bhavana. This is your union with the Absolute. This is your union with the consciousness. This is your union with the divinity. A radiance. The entire space becomes a sun. You are one with the universe. There is no difference between the you and other people. You are a part of divinity. You are experiencing the flood of radiance. You are getting illumined. So this is the sixth stage of spiritual development. And this happens. So this has happened with the illumined people, right? So the last stage is called as Turiya. Existence, pure consciousness. Now, the sun and the energy, nothing is there. You are changing the paradigm. You are now totally changing the paradigm. Till this particular point in time, the paradigm was the sun, right? So you are understanding from the metaphor of the sun, and now you are becoming one with the sun. The last stage of the spiritual development is existence, consciousness, bliss. Sat Chit Anand. When you become one with the pure consciousness, when you realize that you are Turiya, you are the fourth, you are the Atman, which is the part of the divinity, right? So this is the last stage of your spiritual development, spiritual journey, and spiritual growth. I will explain you from again a very simple thing, because all these particular terms and all that 4 years back, I was also not knowing what is this Padartha Bhavana, Asam Shakti and all that. Yes, I fully understand that. And I'm not claiming that means right now means I'm nearing getting illumined or something like that. I'm a student, right? I'm a student sharing with the learners who are passionate about learning the spiritual development journey. So we are at the same level. I will now explain you from the very simple perspective. Again, the 7 stages. I'm not going to leave this particular 7-stage journey. The first stage is ignorance. You are ignored. You don't know who you are, right? Ignorance, the first stage, causes the second stage called as error. Ignorance causes error, right? So you are ignored about a rope in the dark, and you are making an error that it is not a rope, it is a snake. So whatever actions you will take and all that, all will be wrong, right? So when you don't understand who you are ignorant, whatever actions you are going to take will be the error. So this is the stage 2. Now what will happen due to the stage 2? That error will cause sorrow. So the third stage is sorrow. If you are fortunate and you get a guru, or you read something, then you will get an indirect knowledge. Fourth stage, from the sorrow, now you are looking for solutions, right? There is a sorrow, you are looking for solution. Either you get a guru or you read something, you get an indirect knowledge. Someone is telling you, you are reading, you have not yet experienced anything. So the fourth stage is indirect knowledge. Fifth stage is you realizing the truth. You experiencing the truth, right? That is called a direct knowledge. Now you know, you have experienced, you have meditated, you have felt yourself. Fifth stage. Simple, right? So all the 5 stages are simple. The fifth stage is direct knowledge. You are experiencing that. What will happen when you will have a direct knowledge, when you will experience that? Your sorrow will go. Simple, na? Sixth stage. Now there is no sorrow, there is no confusion. Because what is the root cause of the sorrow? Root cause of the sorrow is ignorance. Now the ignorance is gone. So sorrow is gone, is the 6th stage. Simple. What is the 7th stage? Bliss, Anand. Now because sorrow is gone, automatically you will enter a stage called as bliss, which is a 7th stage. Of course, the bliss also is not a 7th stage, but bliss is a part of the 7th stage. Existence, consciousness, bliss. So the bliss is a part of the 7th stage. So you enter the 7th stage. It's very simple. Now Swamiji will explain you with one practical example. So let us understand from a third way, again the 7 stages of spiritual development.
If we feel we are dissatisfied with this particular state of things in my life, that's enough for you to start on spiritual life. That's enough. But what happens in most cases is we feel quite apart from spirituality, there is something available right here in this world which will serve to take away my suffering and give me peace of mind. Yeah, spirituality, religion, maybe, yes. But I'd really be happy. I just want $100,000. That's enough. I'll be happy. Or I'll really be happy if I get this nice house in the suburbs with a nice school district. That's what is not Vedanta. This relationship, this amount of wealth, this amount of success, and I have got it. Now there are people who strongly feel that. And no amount of persuasion will dissuade them from that. The only thing that will work is experience. Let them go through it many times. Then they'll begin to see neither this nor that is helping me. Then one awakens into something higher. And that could be spiritual life. And there are stages. One awakens from pure pursuit of materialism to a moral and ethical life. That makes you happier. From just being a good person, I'm a good person but an atheist, to awakening to a higher power. From being a devout bhakta, devotee, Catholic or something, to the pursuit of jnana, of spiritual knowledge, that higher power is within me. So there are stages of awakening. Life teaches you. It's the wise one who takes the lesson very quickly and moves on. It's the foolish person who keeps on repeating it and churning his wheels in the mud and trying to just digging oneself in deeper and deeper and deeper, while precious time flies by. Precious time flies by. And soon nothing more can be done. You have to wait for the next life. Another way of looking at it is, first of all, we try to make ourselves happy by rearranging the world, by changing the world. My circumstances in the world must be different. A better house, a better car, a better relationship. We try to reform the world. We try to reform others. Make others, they should behave like this and they should not behave. The main purpose is they should all be consistently and endlessly nice to me. That's the basic thing. If you say it out loud, it sounds silly, but that's what we're trying to do. Then slowly we realize that doesn't work. It's very difficult to rearrange the world. Even if you do according to your liking, it still is not particularly satisfying. By the time the world has fallen into the perspective you want it to be, you have moved on and changed. It is no longer satisfying to you. Then you become mature. You try to rearrange your own life. Okay, I'm going to get up early and I'm going to do yoga and I'm going to eat gluten-free and that will make me happy. Rearrange the physical circumstances of your life. Very soon you see, no, that's not going to make me happy. Then you go further. No, the real thing is inside. I'm going to rearrange my mind. I will have holy thoughts. I will think about my Ishta Devata. I will repeat my mantra and or I will calm my mind down in meditation and follow the breath and things like that. That works much better if you do it seriously. But even that's not ultimate. Finally, you come to who is this I who is trying to be materialistically happy or morally happy, ethically happy or spiritually happy. All of these projects belong to the I. Who or what is that I? When you investigate it, you find the real I, Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham, who does not need any of it. Who does not need the wealth and pleasure of the world, who does not need the high moral, ethical life. Not that the person becomes unethical, remember, that's a wrong understanding. Who does not even need spirituality. Shankaracharya, you say, who said that? You're making it up. No. Remember that Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham, Shankaracharya sings, I am Shiva, I'm the nature of bliss and consciousness. One of the lines goes, Na dharmo na chartho na kamo na moksha. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham, Shivoham. What do people want? They want pleasure. I don't need it. What do people want? They want power and wealth and success. I don't need it. What do people want? They want virtue so that they can go to heaven after death. I don't need that also. What do people want? They don't want any of that. They want moksha. They want to come to Vedanta society and get liberated and enlightened. I don't need that also. Who needs that? The ignorant person needs it. I am Satchidananda. Why do I need moksha? So that's how it comes. Step by step.
Step by step. So now we will talk on the spirituality in management. That is, finally, we are all part of this Maya, Vishwa. We are all working. And whatever little knowledge, little wisdom we have, we want to implement that into our personal life, professional life. So after understanding all this, right, let us talk about the application. So the spirituality in work, in simple terms, means finding meaning, purpose, value, and motivation in one's work beyond paychecks and performance. It is about people, all people in an organization, finding a sense of oneness and togetherness. It is about human citizenship. Spirituality in management is about human citizenship, not only global citizenship, human, for the human race, the citizenship for the human race. That is the essence of spirituality in management. If I talk about the theory of spirituality in leadership, right, because there are many leadership theories, servant leader and autocratic leader and all kinds of visionary leaders. So if I talk about a spiritual leader, so the emphasis will be on contributing to the holistic growth of oneself and others through the leader's vision, purpose, values, wisdom, innovation, attributes, behaviors, and sharing. The leader has to share. So the spiritual leadership strives for sustainable social contribution, which is larger than the work or the organization's mission. Either the leader has to include that as the organization mission or do which is a part or more than the work for a sustainable social contribution. Again, I'm talking very simply. I'm not talking about some extraordinary things. I'm only talking about the attitude. I'm only talking about the mindset. I'm only talking about the vision and mission of a leader and the organization. If that particular leader is spirituality oriented.